Coming up on Colonial Crossfire, classified government leaks implicating President Trump, new attacks on the press, and new questions about the president's Russia connections. Joining us on the left, TJ Clark. On the right, Alec DeFruscia. And I'm your moderator, Andrew Desiderio. This is Colonial Crossfire. Only 1 month in and a key staffer is already out. Welcome to Colonial Crossfire. I'm Andrew Desiderio. President Donald Trump has had his share of drama during his first month in office. He's issued controversial executive actions, called the press the enemy. He's survived confirmation battles for some of his top cabinet nominees, and he fired his national security advisor over questions about his contacts with Russian officials. Joining us to discuss all of that and more, our familiar student panel. On the left, TJ Clark, a senior from Oswego, Illinois, majoring in political science. TJ is the debate committee chair for the GW College Democrats. On the right, Alec DeFruscia, a senior from Tewksbury, Massachusetts, majoring in political science. Alec is a member of the GW College Republicans. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Andrew. Just like to remind you, I was the only and first GW Crossfire panelist to predict a Trump victory.
That's right.
So,
I'll give you credit for that.
I will be going on my Trump victory tour.
That's right. I'll give you credit for that.
So it's good to be back.
Thank you. President Trump fired his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, after it was reported that he misled Vice President Mike Pence about the content of his conversations with Russia's ambassador to the U.S. Pence denied repeatedly when speaking with members of the media that Flynn had discussed the issue of sanctions with the Russian ambassador. But the transcripts of those calls painted a very different picture. Flynn reportedly misled the FBI on the same subject during an interview last month. The Justice Department later warned the White House that Flynn could be blackmailed as a result of those conversations. As the FBI continues its investigation into the matter, Flynn could be found in violation of the Logan Act, which forbids private citizens from negotiating with foreign governments. The White House, though, sought to pick up the pieces by placing the blame not on Flynn, but on the government officials who leaked information about the Flynn case to reporters.
What he did wasn't wrong. What he did in terms of the information he saw, what was wrong was the way that other people, including yourselves in this room, were given that information. Because that was classified information, it was given illegally. That's the real problem.
So, Alec, is it a deflection to go after the leakers rather than put the blame squarely on Michael Flynn?
Not at all, Andrew, and I will tell you why. The FBI just this week dropped all charges against Flynn. They said that the case was closed. Also, NPR also reported this week that there was no wrongdoing in the Flynn transcripts. So as far as it goes, this is a clear purge of Trump loyalists from the White House. The media hates the Trump administration, and these career bureaucrats entrenched in Washington, D.C. have an issue with Mr. Trump and his administration. He's going to change the game. He's a risk. He's a game changer. He's a change agent. These people are loyal to President Obama. They are not loyal to Mr. Flynn, and they want to somehow undermine the administration. And so they leaked this information, which turned out to be false. Mr. Flynn was not wrong. He may have misled the vice president, which he should have been reprimanded for. However, this is not a deflection.
Well, so to be clear, the president did say, and I quote, "The leaks were real and the news was fake." So, TJ, I want to go to that point then. Do you share Alec's concern about these leaks having gotten out to the press?
Sure. I mean, I share a concern in that if it's the deep state, as it's coming up and being talked about as of late, trying to impact and make a White House or a president look bad, that is of some concern to me. And that'd be of concern to me if it were a Republican or if it were a Democrat in office. But that said, on General Flynn, there's a couple of questions that and I think a lot of Americans still have. The first one relates to the two C's, as it were, contact and collusion. How often was General Flynn or the Trump campaign team, transition team, or Trump White House, or I'm sorry, before the White House, in touch with Russian officials to talk about sanctions? Also, on the collusion, like how far, what was said, how far was General Flynn willing to work with with Russian contacts before they were formally in office and possibly in violation with the Logan Act? So this is all of really great concern. The other thing, and I think this is the question that I have most, is why was it that when Vice President Pence found out that he was lied to by General Flynn, why did it take weeks for General Flynn to be removed? I think you said it yourself that General Flynn should have been reprimanded. I agree, but Donald Trump, the President of the United States, knew that the National Security Advisor lied to the Vice President about his contact with the Russians, but kept him in office only until the media pointed it out.
So then you agree with Sean Spicer's characterization that this was a trust issue, not a legal issue?
If the FBI has truly closed their investigation, it is an illegal issue. It's a legal issue only so far as there's an ongoing investigation and he broke the law. There may be a violation of the Logan Act. I would like questions answered that may open up a legal issue. But right now, primarily, it's a trust question. It is apparent to me that Michael Flynn could not be trusted by President Trump or Vice President Pence. My main question, though, is when President Trump knew that he couldn't be trusted weeks before he was actually asked to resign, what was going on in the interim? And it wasn't until the press pointed out that General Flynn had lied. Only then did Donald Trump fire him.
Alec, is it responsible for the president to keep labeling things as fake news when he doesn't agree with it? Fake news, as we know, is something that's crafted deliberately to deceive people. I don't think any of these leaks, anything we see in the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, AP, are considered fake news, right?
Well, the issue here isn't whether it was or was not fake news. As we found out, there has been no evidence of the Trump campaign colluding with Russia. There has been no evidence that Michael Flynn broke the law. The FBI ended their investigation this week. Did he misspeak to the vice president? Yes. But did he break the law? Did he collude with Russia? No. I mean, clearly the media has it out against these Trump officials. I mean, and they've made that very clear. There is a visceral hatred for the Trump administration because he is an agent of change. The Washington establishment does not want this change. And if there was a clear violation, the FBI wouldn't have closed their investigation this week. And I know we have fact checkers that can check that. The FBI closed their investigation this week, or you can check out HillaryClinton.com. It's closed. It's a settled issue. Flynn has resigned. It's time to move on. We have H.R. McMaster in there, who is a more than competent national security advisor. He turned around Iraq. The issue is that does the media hate the Trump administration? Yes. Did Michael Flynn break the law? No. It's over.
If I might, it's more than just misspeaking. Misspeaking would have been General Flynn telling the vice president. I spoke with the Russians on Tuesday when he actually spoke with them on Monday or Wednesday. He told the vice president he did not speak to the Russians. That's what he was told. That's not misspeaking. That's a lie. So that's why you're right. If the FBI closed their investigation, if they've decided that there isn't anything to worry about, I do trust their judgment. But there are a lot of questions left to be answered. Again, why was it that when President Trump knew that General Flynn had lied to the Vice President of the United States, that it took weeks for him to actually be removed? And this isn't a question of misspeak, it's an actual lie.
So then to Alec's point about reporters, do you think, as President Trump says, the press is the enemy?
No, oh my goodness, no. Look, this isn't, President Trump is not the first president to criticize the media. Or the press. President Obama was known to do that against Fox News, but these sorts of things go back to Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson used to say that nothing that is written in the newspapers today can be believed. The problematic thing for President Trump is that the reason why President Jefferson said that is because they were writing about Sally Hemings. And so the problem is that when you call the press the enemy of the people, that becomes very dangerous. It's an authoritarian phrase. He's not the first person to use it. If I remember correctly, Mao Zedong used to say the same thing in China. And just this week, the chancellor of the University of Texas, a former Navy admiral, said that this was the greatest threat to democracy he's ever seen in his life and his career.
And real quick, guys, I want to touch on this new executive order that we're expecting soon. It will not contain language about the Syrian refugee program, and it won't specifically bar green card holders, which is the issue we saw at airports the weekend after the initial order was handed down. It will also apply to the same 7 countries. Alec, what's your reaction to this? Will it survive in court?
It will survive in court. The first executive order should have survived in court. However, as we know, the Ninth Circuit is an activist court. They have an 85% turnover rate at the Supreme Court. This one will, the first executive order was rolled out poorly, I will agree. Detaining green card holders was not right. However, this new executive order, clearly there is judicial precedent where the president has the right to decide who comes in and out of our country. For this judicial interference that we had with the original executive order was completely out of the ordinary, but it shouldn't be a surprise coming from the Ninth Circuit. We've had Supreme Court case after Supreme Court case saying that matters of immigration should be left up to the elected branches of government, not the judiciary. The the new executive order should ban those 7 countries, and it will hold up in court.
TJ, real quick, do you think that the new executive order will clear up these holes in the original order?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it hasn't been released. I mean, we've only heard fleeting things. We were supposed to have heard about it by now, but we're still waiting on it. I mean, what I'll say is that the last executive order was wrong, and if the Trump administration at the Trump White House thought that it would have been overturned in court, they would have taken it to the Supreme Court. But even they seem to not believe that it wouldn't have stood in the Supreme Court. So yes, the Ninth Circuit may have an 85% turnover rate, but it seems like that would have fit in the 15%, or President Trump and his Justice Department would have pushed it along.
All right, guys, we got to go to break. Coming up after the break, we'll turn our focus to President Trump's foreign policy. Stay with us.
Raise high. This isn't just our battle cry. It's our call, our challenge. Because when you are called to Washington, you are called to higher expectations, to a higher standard. We are called here to advance knowledge, to serve society, to change the world. This is the George Washington University, and what we make is history. So stand up, be bold, take risks, press on, push harder, raise high.
Welcome back. President Trump has begun rolling out his foreign policy that's oftentimes at odds with public statements made by his own cabinet officials. Just recently, Defense Secretary James Mattis had to clarify during a trip to Iraq that the U.S. is, quote, not here to seize anybody's oil. President Trump suggested on his first full day in office that the U.S. should have taken the oil from Iraq because, in his view, it would have stopped the rise of ISIS. This, of course, is at best a violation of international law and at worst a war crime. Alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Trump suggested that his administration might no longer be pushing for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. His UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, quickly walked that back, saying the U.S. is absolutely committed to a two-state solution. And a story that doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon is Trump's ties to Russia, his alleged ties to Russia. Earlier this month, it was reported that top Trump campaign advisors were in constant communication with Russian government officials, fueling outrage and discontent from Democrats and Republicans over what was discussed and when. Trump has dismissed the reports as, quote, fake news. His chief of staff gave a similar denial.
Well, I don't represent the campaign, but what I just told you is what the highest levels of the intelligence community have told me, which is it is an inaccurate and grossly overstated story, and it's not true.
So, TJ, who do you believe?
Well, I mean, to tell you the truth, I mean, I'm having a difficult time believing the Trump White House, the Trump administration, all the officials. It doesn't seem as if there's a clear, coherent defense or evidence showing us that he isn't connected to these folks. I mean, these things keep coming up, and they keep leaking, drip, drip, drip. I mean, so if the Trump White House, if the Trump administration were serious about clearing up ties to Russia, they would call for a special investigator to take a look at these ties, or at least be more open to Congress investigating the ties. I, more than anybody, and I'll include Alec, would hope that there are no ties here and hope that this is all cleared up and there's nothing to be worried about. But it's hard to not be concerned when these things keep coming up.
Alec?
I mean, you know, if the Democrats were this concerned about Russia during the Cold War, it would have been over 20 years sooner. Time and time again, we do these investigations, and it is proven the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, has no ties to Russia. NBC Pete Williams reported this week that the investigators have found no collusion between the Trump campaigns and contacts in Russia. I mean, you know, the left and the media push this narrative that somehow the Trump campaign, the Trump administration is, you know, colluding with Russia as a way to undermine the administration. And every time it's investigated, every single time we find out, no. And I would encourage a congressional investigation, because if Chaffetz decides to investigate these alleged ties to Russia, he's going to come up just like the FBI came up, just like everyone else is reporting. There are no ties between the Trump campaign and Russia.
TJ, what about that? Is it overstated? Like
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I hope that there are no ties here, and I hope that an investigation by Congress or a special investigator would prove that as much. I mean, I'll also add, just because I feel like I need to, Cold War is not a partisan issue. Democrats were just as rough on the Soviet Union as Republicans were.
TJ, in 2012, Mitt Romney did say that Russia was our number one geopolitical foe, and he was laughed at.
Yep.
He was right in hindsight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, look, I was one of the people that laughed at Governor Romney. I mean, I thought it was a laughable thing. was born in 1995. I've never lived in a world where I thought that Russia was our enemy. And so when he said that in 2012, it seemed outdated. It seemed like an old James Bond movie. I recognize now that we've had two consecutive administrations of different parties, Democrat and Republican, President Bush, President Obama, who have tried to make relations with Russia better. But each time we have reached out, our hand has been slapped by Russia. It is apparent to me now more than ever that this is an adversary. I'll admit that early on in the campaign, when now President Trump talked about wanting better relations with Russia, I didn't think that was the worst thing in the world. Why would it be a bad thing for us to try to reach out to every nation in the world and be friends with as many people as possible? But it is apparent to me now that every time we try to reach out to Russia, we end up worse than we did before. It is apparent to me this is an adversary.
So I do want to touch on these foreign policy issues then. I mentioned in the open about Benjamin Netanyahu and with General Mattis regarding oil in Iraq. Alec, we had just last week, General Kelly had to clean up a remark that President Trump made when he said these deportations are going to be a military operation. General Kelly had to, of course, clear up there is no use of military force. My question to you is President Trump in charge of his own foreign policy?
Yes, he is in charge of his own foreign policy, but at the same time, President Trump comes from a business background. That's why he's surrounded himself with able, capable, very well respected by both sides of the aisle generals who will help him dictate that foreign policy. I trust General Mattis in Iraq. He is well respected. He was passed by a vote of 98-1 in the Senate. General Mattis will guide Mr. Trump in his policy as far as Iraq and other defense issues go, and General Kelly will take the lead on Homeland Security.
So you attribute this then to Trump just being a novice and relying on his experts then?
Well, he's not a novice, because if he was a novice, he would have picked a bad cabinet.
Novice in the sense of him just being in office for 1 month and not knowing the ropes quite yet.
Right. So, before we start calling Mr. Trump a novice,
no, of course
as I know many in the media like to do, he has surrounded himself with very capable, able generals who will help him form a coherent foreign policy.
What about that then, TJ? These generals are very well respected. They are, they have been praised as pretty good picks.
Absolutely. And I'll say here publicly that I thought the pick of General Mattis, General Kelly, to go a little bit further, Nikki Haley, all phenomenal picks for the cabinet.
These are the individuals that had contradicted
exactly,
him on his policy
and that's my point, is that I feel pretty lucky to have these three folks, and there's more that I can think of if you give me a moment, to have these folks in place to correct the record. The problem now, luckily right now, that there's not necessarily a sense of urgency that when President Trump kind of sounds like he's moving away from a two-state solution, you have Nikki Haley who can rush to a press conference and say, nope, we're still doing a two-state solution. When you have President Trump saying we should have stolen the Iraq's oil, you have General Mattis could say, that's a war crime, we're not doing that. Or when he says ICE raids are a military operation, you have General Kelly saying, no, we're not doing that. Or Vice President Pence saying, no, we believe in NATO. General Mattis said the same. There's no sense of real urgency right now, and those things can be corrected. What this alludes to and what this concerns me is that when there is a sense of urgency, when there, God forbid, is a tragedy or something terrible happens and all the eyes of the world turn to President Trump and look for a comment and look for his words, if he misspeaks, that can be life and death for a lot of folks. So I'm not going to say he's a political novice. He wouldn't have won, or he wouldn't have put together such not a great cabinet, but wouldn't have put these 3 or 4 people in really great places. But words matter. Words matter. When you say things in sense of urgency, you have to make sure you're choosing your words correctly.
Alec, was it right for President Trump to stand next to the Prime Minister of Israel and basically declare that you need to curb these settlements, which is in line with the Obama administration's policy?
Right. Yes, it was. I mean, Mr. Trump knows, President Trump knows, that these settlements right now are an obstacle to peace. Now, instead of trying to force a solution down the throats of the Israelis and the Palestinians like the Obama administration did, President Trump said, Prime Minister Netanyahu, we're going to hold off on the settlements. We're not going to stop them altogether. We're going to hold off on them right now because the goal right now is peace. Now, Trump didn't fully commit to a one-state solution. Trump didn't fully commit to a two-state solution. And Nikki Haley came out and said it's the policy of the United States to pursue a two-state solution. That's always been the policy of the United States. That's been the policy of the United States, since the foundation of Israel in 1947. So President Trump, he knows what he's doing. He has the right team around him, and his foreign policy will come together.
All right, guys, thank you very much. After this break, it's Rapid Fire. Stay with us.
Great journalism matters because it's critical to a democracy that the public is informed and engaged and involved. And that happens by having credible information. And so the most important thing, whatever the delivery platform, whatever the technology, whatever the business model, is that the information itself is coming in solid and important ways and is being conveyed in compelling ways because there's so much noise and competition out there. And so that's what I really want our students to be able to do, be brilliant storytellers, keen observers, and compelling communicators.
Welcome back. Our panel joins us again for Rapid Fire, some quick answers to some quick questions. Last month, federal judge Neil Gorsuch was nominated by President Trump to be the next Supreme Court justice, filling the vacancy created following the death of Justice Antonin Scalia. Alec, was Gorsuch a good choice?
Gorsuch was an excellent choice. He's an appropriate successor to Antonin Scalia. He comes from the originalist tradition. He'll be sure to uphold the Constitution. He's a strong conservative, and I think Neil Gorsuch will be a fine replacement to the late Antonin Scalia.
TJ?
Oh, I'm still waiting for the Merrick Garland hearings. Merrick Garland was duly nominated by a president of the United States with more than a year or with about a year left in office. A president doesn't serve for 7 years; he serves for 8. Merrick Garland deserved a hearing, and I think that this might be a stolen Supreme Court seat.
All right, and recent polls out of France show Marine Le Pen of the anti-EU National Front Party leading in the first round of voting for the country's presidential election in a neck-and-neck battle with centrist candidate Emmanuel Macron. TJ, what does it say about Europe that Le Pen is pulling such support, and do you think she could pull this off?
I never say never now. Look, I mean, what does it say about Europe is the question that you asked. It says that I don't think that more globalist movements or more movements talking about our global community are getting a voice out. It also says we also know there's a lot of involvement there's a lot of involvement of Russia in these nationalist movements in Europe, and it would be a tragedy if that kind of extended to France, and I'm rooting for Macron over here.
Right, so you mentioned the Russia connection. In Europe, they often openly embrace Putin, whereas here in the United States, Trump is alleged to have ties, but you never see Trump actually saying, oh, he's this great, yeah.
Yep.
Alec?
It's funny how the left always uses Russia as the boogeyman for any nationalist movement that happens to pop up. First we had Brexit, then we had Trump, then we're going to have Le Pen. I mean, the people in Europe are sick and tired of EU bureaucrats dictating their lives. When the people rise up and they're showing a clear rebuke of the European Union. So we'll see if Le Pen wins. I'm not sure if she will. I'm not 100% sold on her as a presidential candidate, but clearly we've seen that we're entering a new era of foreign policy, a new world order where the people are finally going to take the power back from the elites.
All right, and newly elected Illinois Senator and Iraq War veteran Tammy Duckworth will be GW's 2017 commencement speaker. Alec, are you looking forward to Senator Duckworth's speech?
Be careful, she's my senator.
Well, I'll be honest with you, TJ. The only junior senator from Illinois I want speaking is Barack Obama. But Tammy Duckworth, there's no doubt, is a hero. She gave more than she had to. I mean, she served with honor and distinction in Iraq. However, as a VA official, she was corrupt. She left veterans out to dry as she nurtured a budding political career. And it's funny how GW likes to use its commencement speakers as a platform for 2020 presidential candidates. There are a slew of great GW alum that we could have asked. Kellyanne Conway, first woman to lead a successful presidential campaign, GW alum. Senator Mike Enzi from the great state of Wyoming, also a GW alum. So it's funny how we seem to pick junior B-list senators from Illinois.
B-list.
TJ,
This is my senator. Tammy Duckworth is an American hero.
Which Alex said.
Which you said. No one will deny that. No, I know. I am so excited. I cannot wait. I was in class when I found out and nearly leapt out of my seat. Tammy Duckworth served our country with honor in Iraq. She is now a tireless advocate for veterans issues and has been both in the House and now she will be in the Senate. I can hardly wait for commencement. I wasn't looking forward to graduation. I've loved my time here at GW, but now I can hardly wait.
All right, and with that, I think we're all looking forward to it, guys. And with that, we end our debate here on Colonial Crossfire. Thank you very much, TJ Clark and Alec DeFruscia, for joining us. When we come back, I sit down with a former State Department spokesman about the classified leaks coming from the federal government. Don't miss it. Welcome back. The fallout from Michael Flynn's resignation has renewed President Trump's attacks on his favorite target, the media. The president acknowledged that the leaks implicating Flynn were real, but said the news was, quote, fake. He said reporters should be, quote, ashamed of themselves for publishing leaked information. Now, this all raises a very important question. Why do these government employees feel compelled to leak to classified information to reporters in the first place? With trust in the media already so low and attacks on the media's legitimacy at an all-time high, journalists are often caught between a rock and a hard place. Who better to speak with about all of this than P.J. Crowley, a former State Department spokesman who dealt with plenty of leaks himself and now teaches at the GW Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication. Professor Crowley, thanks so much for being here.
Pleasure.
So I want to start off on this issue of the leaks. You have a lot of experience dealing with these types of leaks. Is President Trump right to focus on the leaks themselves rather than the substance of what was talked about in these conversations between Mike Flynn and the Russian ambassador?
Well, governments do leak, and the United States government has a long history. Leaks happen for a variety of reasons. You know, the president's not entirely wrong. Some of this may well be about politics, but some of this might be an issue that a government employee believes needs more attention. You know, a government employee might think that given the direction of a particular policy, there's a question of legality. Leaks can embarrass a president, leaks can box a president in. There are lots of different motivations. I would also say that we have to give reporters actually credit. In some cases, what might appear to be a leak is just very good reporting. For example, David Sanger of the New York Times, who has done a lot of reporting on a computer worm that ended up blowing up a lot of Iranian centrifuges. Yes, he benefited from some quote-unquote leaking, but the detail was just simply very good, reporting, putting facts together and then being able to see a larger picture.
Right. So we've seen that a lot of news organizations, particularly the AP, Washington Post, New York Times, have all been publicly soliciting leaks, telling potential leakers that they will be protected and that they can communicate with them through these encrypted channels. This is something that was previously unheard of. Does it concern you that news organizations are actively pressing for leaks and openly soliciting them?
Well, I think it's a matter of technology. Have reporters encouraged leaks forever? Yes.
But so openly from the organization?
But now you have an organization like WikiLeaks, for example, that exists expressly to be able to glean documentation. And what we've seen not only in the Chelsea Manning case but also in the Edward Snowden case is a leaker now has an unprecedented ability to transfer hundreds of thousands of documents to a reporter. It used to be the classic leak, someone grabs a folder out of a file, tucks it in their under their overcoat, and then spirits it outside of the the government door. Now someone takes a disk, inserts it here, presses a button, and all of a sudden now you have leaks on such a massive scale that we have not seen before.
So something we've been examining really closely here is the fact that the attacks on the media's legitimacy from President Trump, calling them the enemy, are happening at the same time as credibility in the media is at an all-time low. And as I mentioned, Trump recently said that journalists are, quote, the enemy of the American people. When the media is as unpopular as it is today, do you think these leaks have less of an impact in that the general public is believing them less?
Well, I think you have to look at a broader context here. We have a 50-50 country, very profound divide. We saw that in the 2016 campaign. And then we also have the development of two separate information universes. If a person, for example, watches Fox News, you're going to see one recitation of the news. If someone, for example, looks at MSNBC, you're going to see a very different recitation of the news. And so as much, and I do to President Trump's rhetoric to be very, very concerning. democracy functions on an informed and citizenry, and whether you like this news outlet or not, the news media, is a vehicle by which we create an informed and citizenry, and the news media are it's an imperfect mechanism, but nonetheless, the media are the primary institution that holds government to account. There's always going to be tension in this relationship, and it's a fundamental pillar of democracy, whether it's popular or not.
So you served in the Obama administration. I want to read you a passage from a recent piece by James Risen in the New York Times. He says, quote, "If Donald J. Trump decides as president to throw a whistleblower in jail for trying to talk to a reporter or gets the FBI to spy on a journalist, he will have one man to thank for bequeathing him such expansive power, Barack Obama." Now, Risen's argument here is basically that the Obama administration set dangerous precedents by using the Espionage Act to go after whistleblowers and issuing subpoenas to force journalists to reveal their sources. As someone who served in the Obama administration, do you buy Risen's arguments, and do you worry that the Trump administration could go even further than how Risen is describing?
Well, I do worry about the Trump administration going further and delegitimizing the news media as an important element of our democracy. I disagree with James Risen. I know him well. We've talked about these issues a number of times. The most significant case that James Risen was involved in, involving the unmasking of Valerie Plame as an intelligence operative, that case actually started, in the Bush administration. There are very significant questions that have been raised by James Risen's experience, but it's not that the Espionage Act has changed, and it's not necessarily that the Obama administration was on a campaign against leakers. What we have here is, again, an interesting aspect of technology. The same technology that allows someone to, like a Chelsea Manning, to send vast stores of information, to a Julian Assange. That same technology leaves digital fingerprints and now allows the government, to be able to track back and try to figure out, where this information come from, and they can look at emails, phone calls, or other data that will tell them, and actually identify, who the leaker is.
So your argument is that the technology has changed and has allowed the government to more easily find out who did these leaks.
Yeah, and I would emphasize that these are cases where there has been a compromise of highly classified and sensitive information. But the focus of the government is not on the media. The focus of the government is on those who had a security clearance and passed sensitive information,
right,
to the media. So if there's a prosecution, for example, or a case or an investigation, it's not about the media per se. Although in Risen's case, a journalist could be called, to testify, in a prosecution of an alleged leaker.
And James Rosen of Fox News was also labeled as a co-conspirator, and the FBI spied on his emails, of course.
And I think that was a case where the government
decision.
Did go too far.
Yeah.
I think that, what the government is focused on is those, and I, for 30 years, had a government security clearance, and I signed an oath saying I will protect, American interests, including classified information. If I violate that oath, I am subject to some sort of administrative action, and in extreme cases, a prosecution. I thought in this case the government did go too far. The journalists have a job to do. It's a very important job. There's always going to be tension in this relationship. There should be tension in this relationship. But I think to designate a journalist as a co-conspirator, I thought would set a dangerous precedent, not only in terms of the dynamic within our country, but what that says to autocratic nations around the world who, to a much greater degree, are closing down independent media sources, throwing journalists in jail, considering them truly enemies of the state.
And finally, the State Department hasn't held a televised press briefing since January 19th, the final day of the Obama administration. As a former spokesman of the State Department, does this concern you?
I think it's understandable in the short term. The Trump administration is still getting its internal policy-making processes in place. There have been very significant contradictions publicly, even as we sit here yesterday in terms of a very important trip to Mexico by the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Secretary of State. And what they said on the ground in Mexico City seemed to contradict
or be in response to what
some of the political rhetoric
right.
Of the president. So I'm very sympathetic that once you stand behind the podium at the State Department, you have to have confidence that you know what the American foreign policy is. You understand, where your administration, the president that you're representing, and the country that you're representing, where we're going. Identify clearly what our interests are. And those things are in flux. Mm-hmm. I think if we're still having this conversation 30 or 60 days from now, then I think it is a matter of concern, because obviously the United States voice, it's very powerful. The United States is the most influential country in the world, and if we're muting our voice, that does have long-term diplomatic consequences.
Well, let's hope those briefings start up very soon. Professor, thank you so much for being
Pleasure.
here. Thank you. When we come back, Casey Decker has our debate fact check. Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact-checkers monitored our debate. Casey Decker is here to fill us in on what we missed. Casey?
Andrew, just a couple of clarifications for our panelists today. First, our conservative Alec said that the FBI has closed the case on Mike Flynn. It's not clear that that's true. While CNN reported last week that the FBI would not recommend any charges against Flynn, that same report stated that a broader review of Flynn's conduct is ongoing. And our liberal TJ said Flynn told Vice President Pence that he had not spoken with Russian officials. To be clear, Pence knew that Flynn had talked to the Russian ambassador, but Pence was misled about the content of that conversation, having been told Flynn did not discuss sanctions. That's all for the fact check. Andrew?
All right, thanks, Casey. And now for Spilled Milk. Here's our tribute to the very best of late-night political comedy.
Obamacare is the worst piece of legislation ever.
Yes, the worst piece of legislation ever. So good news, Fugitive Slave Act, you're finally off the hook.
Back this morning, he held a meeting with a group of CEOs at the White House. Trump said he wants to replace robots with human workers. Then Mike Pence says, I'll show myself out.
The American flag behind Vice President Mike Pence during his speech in Brussels yesterday accidentally featured 51 stars instead of 50 in honor of the new 51st U.S. state, Panic.
Yesterday, in an interview, he said he wants to expand the U.S. nuclear arsenal and make it top of the pack. I'm not sure if he means top dog or leader of the pack. But either way, he is not the sharpest knife on the Christmas tree.
All right, well, that's all for this episode of Colonial Crossfire. For all the latest updates from our political team at any time, be sure to follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. And check us out online at www.gw-tv.com. For all of us here at GWTV, I'm Andrew Desiderio. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. We'll see you right back here next time.